What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Spencer, aka Spencer the Wiz, with the Delivering Sports Show. I guess you guys are listening to my radio show now as I say this, because we're doing this interview on Thursday. But a very special interview for you guys today. I am interviewing Trey Ryder. He is an analyst for the American Cornhole League and media director, and you'll hear him on ESPN from time to time. And I would like to welcome him to the show now. Thank you so much for joining the Delivering Sports Show.
Thanks, Spencer. Appreciate it.
So how was the ride in Vegas, I guess, because there is a big event going on this weekend?
Yeah, travel went pretty well. I flew in yesterday. That was Wednesday. And then we had kind of the guys driving our trucks. They got here late yesterday as well. So they brought all the equipment in. And then today's Thursday, so it's setup day. So I was able to sneak away for a few minutes as we're getting all the boards laid out, all the broadcast court, everything situated. So getting really excited for this weekend's event.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see, before we go into any of the cornhole stuff, I see that you went to college at Clemson for chemical engineering. Where did the passion for that come from, and how did you, I guess, end up transitioning away from it?
Yeah, it's funny. I've always been a big sports fan all throughout growing up. When I was in high school, I just had an aptitude for math and science, very logical, left-brained. And so when I was looking for what to do, I just felt like, honestly, the safer option was for me to go into a math and science field and engineering. So I went to Clemson for chemical engineering, and I worked as an engineer, a chemical engineer, for about 5 years. And then, somewhere in between there, I joined the ACL on a part-time basis, just doing broadcasting, because I had played competitive cornhole for many years, about 10 years. And so I just had a love for the game. I had that logical left brain mind that ended up pairing well as an analyst for the league, and got to help build the league kind of from the ground up. And then eventually just came a point where it was time for me to make the full jump over, and so jumped over from just a part-time analyst role to now a full-time chief marketing officer for the league.
Yeah, so I'd actually like to get into that. So where does this relationship start with the American Cornhole League? And at the time, did you think it would end up being one of these big national broadcast type of leagues?
Yeah, so the quick answer is no. So when I first started, I started, like I said, I played competitively. And then my dad, who is actually now currently an ACL pro, he got to know the commissioner, ACL Commissioner Stacy Moore. And at the time, Stacy was really just flirting around with the idea of doing these regional cornhole leagues based out of North Carolina. He was doing the Carolina Cornhole Tour and things like that. And my dad kept, being persistent with me, just saying, hey, look, he wants to build this huge league out. He wants to call it the American Cornhole League. He wants to do all these things behind it and make it this thing and get with ESPN and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, you are a lunatic. But eventually they kept pushing. And then, Stacy was able to do it. He secured, an ESPN3 digital deal with ESPN to put the ACL on there. And he went through a couple different analysts and a couple different color commentators before kind of opening it out to the cornhole community to try to grab someone that had been immersed in the league or not necessarily in the league, but in the sport for a while, that kind of had a way to explain to the audience at home the ins and outs of the game. And so my dad was like, you should just do it. Just try it. What if he says no? I mean, it's something that you could try. And so ironically enough, that 4-year anniversary was this week. And I made my debut broadcasting in Vegas at the link on top where the Vortex is up there. We did a broadcast up there, ESPN3. And really from there, the rest is history. I continue to do broadcasting. My role just continued to build and get bigger and bigger there. And so now, 4 years later, we're here back in Vegas, this time at the Westgate Las Vegas Resort, and putting on some of our biggest and best events ever.
That's great. And I want to go into a little further about this whole, did you have to tape, and then not only commentary for the Cornhole League, but what about ESPN? Because it seems like they have their own kind of process for doing that. What kind of tape did they want from you? How nervous were you when you were making this tape? I mean, what's going through your mind when they ask you to audition for play-by-play for cornhole?
Yeah, it's weird. It was because I was hired directly by the league. I wasn't hired through ESPN, and so sports vary depending on the process. But for us, it was really because at the time we were just digital ESPN3. ESPN was really like, you just do whatever you want. But as long as you trust the commentators, then we'll take a look at the tape. They're just a lot more or strict about what they put on their TV broadcast. So ESPN and ESPN2. So yeah, literally I remember, Stacy with the ACL, he wanted me just to film myself talking about the sport and what I could bring to the table as someone that was on camera. So I remember I was actually on vacation when that needed to happen. I sat in a hotel room with my cell phone and just kind of recorded myself talking cornhole for like 5 to 8 minutes or something like that, and sent that in. And apparently it was good enough to, good enough to get me the job. I mean, it really was just unusual. It was kind of interesting, but it was enough to get me there. And then once we kind of made the transition for ESPN3 to ESPN2, ESPN actually was watching us and reviewing our tape and giving feedback and things like, okay, we're putting you on television now, so your commentators need to have this, and they need to get a little bit more refined. And there was different elements of trying to get better as a traditional broadcaster, because I didn't have any of that experience that I certainly had to learn as I got into that role more and more.
Do you feel like any pressure when you're doing national broadcasts as opposed to, I guess, not on ESPN? I mean, what's going through your mind, especially as you went into your first one? How nervous were you when you knew the whole country was going to be listening to you, because you guys were the only live sports on at the time?
Yeah, so I mean, when I did my first digital one like 4 years ago, that was crazy. And then as we we had different milestones along the way, right? So then it was the first time being on ESPN2, and that was in 2017. And then fast forward to like 2019, that was like the first time we got on ESPN, the flagship. And then it was another milestone last year when we were the only sport on, having our best ratings and on for 4 hours at a time. That felt like another milestone. So for me, I'm always nervous at the beginning of every broadcast. For me, the hardest part is always the intros and your opening remarks as people are jumping in and tuning in as the broadcast is starting. But for me, once it kind of gets going, it becomes just talking about something that I'm passionate about, and I almost kind of lose sight of being in front of a camera, in front of people all over the country. It just becomes me sitting talking about cornhole with Jeff, Jeff McCarriger, who was also in the booth with me, and we're just talking back and forth, enjoying the game, and it's in those moments that I almost kind of forget that there are tons of people watching.
Do people feed you information during it, or is it just you two by yourself? Like, do you have a producer in your ear telling you like, hey, you guys should do this? Do you ever feel like you have to be funny? Like, if you haven't been funny long enough? I mean, it probably has a lot of thing going through your mind, but I guess the best way to go about it would just kind of be to zone out and think that you're only talking to the person next to you.
Yeah, sometimes, certainly our producer will, and the different people on staff, if there's something specific that they want to, if they're keeping track of some level of statistics, it's helpful to have somebody else keeping track of that while I'm just kind of focusing on what's happening in the here and now. And so they'll feed me some of that information. But, I maybe put a little bit of pressure on myself a few years ago to try to do things like that. But what I found is what made us successful, and just the feedback that I've gotten from the great team that we have, is just, you just got to go out there and have fun with it and do what you're passionate about. And, what we found is the team that we've put in place, we're naturally passionate about the game and the sport. And so for us, if we can just relay our natural passion in talking about the game, then most of the time for the people at home, that's what makes it interesting enough to keep coming back and keep watching.
Yeah, absolutely. So you kind of talked about it, how when you first kind of got into this, they were critiquing you and telling you should do this more and this and this. So I'm sure at this point you feel like you're pretty comfortable in the booth, or at least you're getting there. I know you're very young like myself, but could you ever see, maybe in the future, maybe doing play-by-play for another sport, or is it always going to be American cornhole for you?
I'm not the type of person to ever say never. I've learned that think I've learned that lesson being a chemical engineer and ending up as working for the American Cornhole League, that you can never say never. But for me right now, my focus is cornhole. It's something that I'm passionate about, and I think that what makes me enjoy it and what I think makes me successful in this role is that I know the game inside and out. Now, as a color commentator for the American Cornhole League, I think that's what separates, that's really what contributes to a strong broadcast is my knowledge of the game. And if I went to something like a baseball or a football, although I've been a sports fan my whole life, it's not something I played at the collegiate level or played at professional level. So I have a little bit against me there. It would have to be more in a play-by-play role that I'd have to do that. And in the play-by-play role, I still think there are plenty of things technically that I need to get better at and things I need to improve on. I am a tough critic on myself, but like I said, playing the never game is something that I don't like to do anymore because I cannot and do not even attempt to try to predict the future anymore.
If you had a sorry about that. If you had a choice, what sport would you go to? Like, what other sport do you follow closely enough that you feel you could do play-by-play commentary for one day?
The only sport that would probably fit would be like football. I'm a diehard football fan. So obviously I went to Clemson. We mentioned that before, and I'm a diehard Tiger fan. So I keep up with college football pretty well, and also professional football. So I was born in Massachusetts, so I am a Patriots fan as well. So for a couple of years there, I like to tell everybody that I was insufferable with the Patriots and the Tigers having a good run there a couple of years ago. So, but yeah, it would probably have to be football if anything.
Absolutely. So I was kind of curious to know, like, where you see yourself. Like, do you think you're like the Woj of the Cornhole League? Do you have like the inside scoop? Like, what kind of broadcaster do you feel that you kind of compare yourself most to, I guess, in outside of the American Cornhole League?
Yeah, it's really weird. I don't even know what to describe myself as, because sometimes I feel like I play different roles in different situations. So, someone that does, someone like a Kirk Herbstreit who does some fantastic color commentary for football and is heavily involved, and also does some of the content in the media outside of the sport and things like that. Sometimes I find myself a lot of times following in his type of footsteps, but other times I feel like an Adam Schefter or a Woj or someone that's kind of got inside details and working a lot directly with our professional players and things like that, and getting to know them very well. So it depends. I because we're still so small, I end up wearing a lot of hats, as we like to say. So it really just varies. And as we grow, we'll develop more and more of a content team and people that will be able to build out the sport alongside us.
Fantastic. And I actually want to get a clarification, because I read an article about you in The Ringer. It says your partner, Jeff, calls you the Tony Romo of ACL. But I've also read, I think in another article, that The Ringer gave you that name. So where does the Tony Romo thing come from?
Yeah, so it's funny because I think that was something, people had called me like Kirk Herbstreit of Cornhole. Someone else had called me Tony Romo, and then it kind of stuck with Tony Romo because it was like Tony Romo was a good quarterback. He wasn't like a Hall of Fame quarterback, and then he kind of went from there into the broadcast booth, and so that natural direction was kind of something that stuck. And then even recently, as we signed our deal with CBS, and now Tony Romo being a member of CBS, that's kind of where it really stuck. But yeah, The Ringer was kind of the one that made that nickname pretty, infamous, I guess, if you will, just because I had gone from, I played competitively, but I was never the best in the country or anywhere, really that close. People always just found a way to be that much better than me. And then the other part was people loved that, one thing they love about Tony Romo's broadcasts is, when he's calling a game, he likes to predict what people are doing. He's like, he'll recognize a call and he'll say, oh, the defense is going to run this way, and then they're going to do this and this and this. And people are always mesmerized by it. And so when I started calling games, I would use my telestrator and I say, oh, one thing that, on this shot right here, you're going to see this guy step out. They're going to get a better angle. They're going to try this drag and have the bag flip in this way. And if the pro does it, it makes me look like this genius. But in reality, it's just because I'm involved in the game. And to a lot of our players within the league, it's very common knowledge. Everybody knows what they're going to do. The thing that I just try to do is give that accessibility to the average Joe at home that doesn't know the sport. And so it's not really that I'm doing anything special about predicting the future. It's just I'm trying to relay the mind of a cornhole player into the broadcast for people watching at home. Oh, I lost your audio.
Can you hear me now? Sorry about that.
Yeah, I got
I was saying, since you have no fans, it seems like the guys can hear you. And I've read a couple stories about them kind of coming back to you after hearing something or saying that's a good idea. So it almost feels like maybe you're coaching the players. Is it illegal to have coaching in cornhole, or I don't know what the rules are behind that?
Not illegal, but certainly there have been times through the pandemic when, back when we couldn't have anybody in the stands, and it was no fans at all during the pandemic and we're pretty close. We're kind of like where the broadcasters are for a basketball game. We're like right courtside. So if I start saying and analyzing a shot, there have been times where I have seen pros have come up to me afterwards and say, I wasn't thinking about doing that, but you made me second guess my shot a little bit. So it's usually just a little friendly banter back and forth after a match. But certainly they're getting better at tuning me out. And now as we're hopefully coming out of the pandemic and hopefully starting to get people back in the stands, it won't be as much of my commentary that's in the heads of the players.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually curious to get a little more into your playing career. Do you feel like it was something that you could have gotten to eventually? Like you could have been a pro, or were you not interested in maybe, because I would imagine you have to just play it nonstop, and that's kind of the way that it works to become a pro. Did that not appeal to you, or was like, how did you see your relationship with the game kind of growing, or why you decided to take it in a different direction?
Yeah, I mean, part of it was just I wasn't good enough, and this was kind of an opportunity for me to do something different. But just being as analytical as I was always in my own head. I mean, from a technique perspective, I always felt like I could throw with the best in the world, but I just couldn't. I didn't have the consistency because I was always in my own head. I was always, oh, I got to do this a little bit better. I got to tweak this. I was just over analyzing every aspect of my game. And that's still true to this day. So who knows? I mean, maybe if I had really, really dedicated the time and tried to get better on the mental side of things, that I could have. But to be honest with you, I love so much what I'm doing now and the perspective I get to watch and experience the sport that I really probably wouldn't change anything.
Yeah, so you actually just alluded to it a minute ago about, having fans back in the stands, but I'm actually curious to get your perspective on this because, I mean, the pandemic raised the popularity of the American Cornhole League to new heights. Like, didn't even think it was possible. So now that people are coming back and all the national broadcasts for NHL, NBA, so on and so forth are coming back, what does the league need to do in order to stay relevant and actually continue to grow from here on out?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a couple different things that we're heavily focused on. Domestically, we're talking in the United States. The first is growing out our player base. So we have a network of directors, over 300 across the country. And so really it's about getting more and more people playing involved. And it doesn't have to be that they're playing at the national level, trying to compete for as an ACL pro, but just getting people playing on weekly league nights and getting people involved in developing a natural fan base and player base. That's certainly something we're focusing on there. The second is our broadcast growth and the growth of our events becoming spectator sports and things, getting people excited about attending these big pro events and watching and tuning in, and getting more and more broadcast exposure. and through both ESPN, CBS, and NBC Sports Network. So all of those different ways outreaching. And then really on the international scale, it's about growing into these different countries and getting into these different countries. And a big hurdle for that is getting equipment in these countries and kind of standardizing that process. And whether it's Europe, Asia, South America, Africa, wherever, just getting the equipment in people's hands so they can start playing, they can start experiencing the sport. And help us continue to grow it across the world.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think there are a lot of people who are paying close attention to the league. Just a couple more questions here for you. I saw on Twitter that ACL announced that there is a video game coming out. I was wondering if you have any details about like what that's going to be like and like maybe release date or if it just begun production.
Yeah, so we're working great with Farsight Studios. They are also the makers of the PBA bowling game that's been released a few times now. But yeah, it's slated for the release in fall of 2021. So we don't have an exact release date, but it will be a simulation game similar to other of the different sports games that you see on different consoles. It'll be all on the major consoles: Xbox, PlayStation, mobile, PC, everything you name it'll be on there. And so we will have 32 ACL pros in the game. Wow. So one of the cool things is actually this weekend, because they're based out of California, they are traveling here to Vegas and bringing their mocap suit, their motion capture suits. So our pros will be suiting up and getting their throwing styles and their body structure and everything modeled and recorded so that they can be placed into the game. So that's going to be a really exciting thing to see this weekend. It'll have different game modes and it'll be online head-to-head. Players will be able to play as their favorite pros. We're really excited to see what Farsight is going to be developing for us. So yeah, fall 2021 is slated for release.
Great. And you kind of lead me into my last question here. Tell us about what's going on this weekend and if there are fans or how you can catch it. What's the best way to watch this weekend?
Yeah, so this weekend is the 2021 ACL Bag Brawl. It is the third of 4 ACL, what we call national events each year. So when you think ACL national, think major in golf. Golf has 4 majors. We have 4 nationals followed by a world championship event in August. So this is national number 3, only open to our 256 ACL pros, the best cornhole players in the world, all within the same division. They'll be competing this weekend for over $40,000 in cash prizes, and the total prize pool for the pro division this season is just over $500,000. So plenty of money up for grabs this weekend and throughout the season. ESPN will be doing a broadcast, multiple ESPN3 broadcasts all weekend long. You can go to iPlayCornhole.com to check out the full slate of schedule. But if you want to catch the conclusion, you want to catch the finals, you can tune in Sunday, May 2nd at 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern on ESPN3. So what is that? 10 a.m. Pacific time here in Vegas. So yeah, that'll be the conclusion of our event, but it's going to be a ton of fun. Tune into the broadcast, and it's our national events are always high intensity.
Fantastic. And to wrap it up, let my radio listeners know like where they could find you and if any other additional information for anybody watching.
Yeah, for anything ACL, you can always go to iPlayCornhole.com. That's the American Cornhole League website. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/iPlayCornhole, Instagram @American Cornhole League, and Twitter @iPlayCornhole. And then if you're looking for me specifically, Instagram and Twitter. Twitter is @Trey Ryder _ACL. And Instagram is @TRyder707. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining the show today. I really appreciate it, and good luck this weekend.
Thanks, Spencer. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.